So welcome to session 10B Crypto of NDSS. We have 4 talks in this session. I will be chairing. For you who don't know me, my name is Roca Marota. I'm a principal scientist at Intel Artificial Intelligence Platform Group here in San Diego. And our focus is basically on privacy-enhancing technology, mostly on the crypto side. So thanks for attending the session. Our first talk will be presented by Trevor Smith of Lawrence Livermore National Labs. The work is joined with the Brigham Young University, and it was actually carried out during a time where he was an undergraduate student. So I'm very excited actually to listen from him. So please join me to welcome our speaker.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Trevor Smith, and I'm here to present on our work, Let's Revoke, which is a system to improve scalable global certificate revocation. There we go. So I want to begin my talk by talking about why public key infrastructure and revocation are important. So public key infrastructure is what prevents man-in-the-middle attacks in the network. And revocation protects that infrastructure from compromised certificates. So without revocation, these kind of attacks, these man-in-the-middle attacks, would go undetected. So there are a couple of traditional implementations for how certificate revocation checking has occurred. The first is certificate revocation lists, or CRLs, which are simply lists of revoked certificates that include some other data, such as the revocation date and the revocation reason. The second primary traditional implementation is Online Certificate Status Protocol, or OCSP, which are on-demand status requests for revocation statuses that go to particular CAs. So there are a couple of primary concerns with these traditional revocation methods. The first being efficiency. CRLs and OCSP are relatively inefficient mechanisms. They are so inefficient, in fact, that no mobile browsers currently perform revocation checking. This inefficiency was also highly visible following the Heartbleed vulnerability during 2014, where many certificates were compromised and the revocation percentage jumped drastically from 1% to 11%. And this had very significant consequences, one example of which was Cloudflare induced an additional $400,000 per month in costs just publishing their large CRL. So following that event, Zakir Derumeric et al. Analyzed the Heartbleed event and said this: the community needs to develop methods for scalable revocation that can gracefully accommodate mass revocation events, as seen in the aftermath of Heartbleed. The second primary concern for these traditional implementations is what's known as soft failing. And soft failing is simply accepting certificates with unknown revocation statuses as being valid or not revoked. This is primarily used by CRLs and OCSP to avoid availability issues, where if a revocation responder goes down, it does not take down all of the dependent websites as well. However, someone in position, an attacker in position to conduct a man-in-the-middle attack, can trivially block revocation requests, thus leaving those kind of attacks undetected. This behavior inspired Adam Langley to state, soft fail revocation checks are like a seatbelt that snaps when you crash. Even though it works 99% of the time, it's worthless because it only works when you don't need it. So in light of these concerns, modern solutions have tried to correct these issues. One implementation is CRL sets, which is Google's more efficient version of CRLs. They achieve this efficiency by removing the unnecessary data, so the revocation date and reason, and only including the revocation status. They also only include a select few revocations, those that they deem important, and they can only hold about 40,000 revocations at a given time. CRL Lite, on the other hand, is a more recent proposal which achieves efficient global revocation coverage using an efficient data structure or a cascading Bloom filter, which is built by a revocation status aggregator that is centrally located. So our proposal, Let's Revoke, was inspired by CRL Lite and uses bit vectors instead to improve the efficiency. These bit vectors eliminate the need for a centralized aggregator while also maintaining the complete global coverage of revocation. So at the heart of Let's Revoke are these dynamically sized bit vectors, which we label certificate revocation vectors, or CRVs, in which each bit represents a revocation status. So a 1 bit here means that a particular certificate has been revoked. So we now need we needed a way to map certificates into this bit vector. So we propose adding a new X509 extension, which we'll call a revocation number, which is an unsigned 32-bit integer that is sequentially issued by each CA. So that bit maps that certificate directly into the CRV. So in this instance, the certificate with revocation number 3 would be the revoked one in this case. Oh, it's the wrong thing. There you go. Sorry if I flashed anybody. There we go. So we also don't want CAs to have to maintain one giant CRV. And so we separate the CRVs based on the expiration date given to each certificate. So in this example, the certificate would have been signed by the CA2, and it would expire on January 1st, 2021. And if it had a revocation number of 3, we could see that it is unrevoked. Is there a better way? There we go. So now that we understand how to map into the certificate revocation vector, it's important to understand how the actual update process works for a CA. So it's a simple process. Every CRV begins as an empty bit vector. And then as needed, it is expanded and then the appropriate bits set. So the CA has an empty CRV. It is asked to revoke the certificate with revocation number 3. So it would expand that bit vector by 4 bits and set the bit at index 3. Revoking 7, you expand again by 4 and set the index of 7. Revoking 2 and 1 require no expansion here, so they just simply set the bit. Once those CRVs have been updated, it is important to obviously send those updates to clients so that they can actually use this revocation information. So there are 3 primary methods for sending these updates. The first is to simply send a list of the new revocation numbers. And under low revocation or normal revocation situations, that is actually the most efficient way to do so. In the case of a mass revocation event where larger updates are generally needed, the CA can construct a CRV that only contains the new revocation numbers, and the client would bitwise OR that in with their currently stored CRV, yielding the updated CRV. If a client has never encountered CRV before, they can also just send the new CRV, and that will always work. So this design has a number of advantages. First, the smaller identifiers and revocation numbers enable a large deal of efficiency gains in a number of places. CRVs themselves are actually very computationally efficient. Querying revocation statuses occur in constant time, and updating stored statuses also occurs very quickly. CRVs are also extremely compressible due to their nature. They are generally a whole bunch of zeros with interspersed ones, so it makes them very, very compressible, which allows us to save a bunch of network bandwidth and client storage. A couple of limitations on this design is it's not backwards compatible. So old certificates that do not have this new extension would not be able to be covered by Let's Revoke. And it also only provides revocation statuses similar to how CRL sets and CRL Lite only provide revocation statuses. However, CRVs can be used in tandem with currently deployed mechanisms that address these limitations. So we also wanted to compare Let's Revoke to the status quo, as it were. And we use 6 criteria that were outlined in the CRL-lite proposal. Primarily, we were concerned with our efficiency comparison, since Let's Revoke was really designed to minimize client storage and network bandwidth. So we compared storage requirements and bandwidth requirements across all the different systems. However, some were a little bit more difficult to directly compare, so we used an approximate model for these strategies. There we go. Oh, go back. There we go. So we used 4 strategies. The first was a revocation number listing strategy, which can be thought of as a highly efficient version of CRLs or CRL sets. We also included CRL-lite, which can be thought of as the state-of-the-art for efficiency, CRVs, which are our proposal. And we also compared it to the combinatics representation, which serves as a theoretical lower bound for representing any combination of values. The reason we didn't use that data structure in Let's Revoke was because it is actually very computationally expensive to work with. So here we have a summary of our storage results for CRV or a revocation strategy covering 1 million certificates. So this graph shows the relationship between the file size or the storage requirements as we vary the revocation percentage. So CRL-lite here is depicted in yellow. It's the one right there in the middle, and we can see that it outperforms the revocation number listing strategy shown in red. If you see that blue arc, that's the combinatics representation, which represents the theoretical lower bound. And yeah, I was always wondering how well this would show up. But if you look really closely, there's actually a green line that follows asymptotically close to that blue line, and that's the CRVs. So this actually shows us that CRVs are near optimal for storing revocation statuses. We also wanted to compare not only the storage on the client end, but also the network bandwidth required. So we conducted simulations using a certificate space of 100 million certificates at 2% revocation rate. So this translates to 2 million revocations that are being covered. For this, the revocation number listing and CRVs both required 114 kilobytes per day, since they use the same update strategy. CRL-lite, on the other hand, required 408 kilobytes per day. Of interesting note is actually CRL sets, which only cover around 40,000 revocations at a time, require 250 kilobytes for their daily updates. So the rest of the 6 criteria for brevity we've summarized here. Desirable qualities for each of the traits we've highlighted in green. And if you look at the bottom column, you can see that Let's Revoke has the greatest efficiency. It meets the timeliness requirements. It promotes a hard failure model. It's privacy preserving, and it's auditable. The only thing that it is missing that we would wish it were is that it's not currently deployed today. However, it is what we would call incrementally deployable, in that any CA and client who chooses to adopt this methodology could begin using or experiencing the benefits without having to wait for the rest of the network to adopt it as well. So we also wanted to see how Let's Revoke would work in a real-world setting. So we conducted an internet-wide scan for the revocation statuses of the network. So we acquired a list of all trusted certificates from Census.io on March 21st in 2018, and then proceeded to require the revocation statuses for using CRLs and OCSP. In summary, the bottom line there for the total, there were about 84 million certificates that we checked, about 1 million of which had been revoked, giving us a revocation percentage of about 1.29%, which somewhere between 1% and 2% is what we expect for the typical revocation percentage from this study and also the previous literature. So using those results, we fed those results into a simulator we created that would output the expected storage and bandwidth requirements for typical usage of Let's Revoke. And so in that circumstance, under normal revocation situation, We expect to have clients store 5 megabytes of revocation data and also only require 25 kilobytes of bandwidth per day. So to put that in perspective, the Google homepage requires about 400 kilobytes of bandwidth. And I think that's a pretty minimal HTML page. So we also want to see what would happen if we put Let's Revoke through a mass revocation event as well. So we proportionally scaled each of the revocation percentage variables from their roughly 1% value to a 10% value. And that yielded an obvious increase in the requirements, but still remained at acceptable levels of 10.8 megabytes of client storage with 150 kilobytes of bandwidth per day. In recent years, the certificate space has actually exploded. And we wanted to see what it would look like to have Let's Revoke work in that kind of space. So we've already flown by the 100 million certificate mark. We're actually around about halfway to the 1 billion certificate mark. And in that space, at 1% revocation, clients would only have to store 12.2 megabytes of revocation data and update that with about 600 kilobytes of data per day. Even in our mass revocation event there, we're still talking in the order of megabytes of data, which is relatively low. So with 1 billion certificates and a revocation percentage at 10, we're only expecting 60 megabytes of compressed storage and a daily update of 4.1 megabytes. So what do we want to take away from this talk is that efficient revocation checking is important. This problem is only growing as the certificate space also rapidly increases. To illustrate that, it's gone through an order of magnitude increase in size over the past 3 years with signs of continuing that pace. We also hope that enabling this kind of efficient revocation checking would enable revocation checking in constrained environments, places that typically have not had the protection of revocation checking, such as mobile devices and IoT devices. And yeah, thank you for your time, and any questions?
So we have time for 2 questions. I'm taking this to you.
So just to clarify, for the mapping, one revocation number maps to one single certificate?
That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to ask, is there any area where Serialite is better than Let's Revoke?
So extremely small revocation percentages. It's kind of a wash between, so we're talking revocation percentages of 0.1% or so. Even revocation number listing and those kind of things, they all have very similar efficiency or requirements, both in bandwidth and storage. But it's very rapidly, as soon as you exit that very low percentage, they separate to their different ways, and they stay on that scaling path.